Chapter 42. Flesh, Blood and Bone. Bela. Bela held up her flowing skirts to prevent tripping as she hurried up the staircase. Since their disastrous wedding, she'd made an effort to look beautiful for her husband. Today her silver ringlet hair was combed, glossed and braided. She wore a clean necklace of pearls, silver earrings, and 7 silver rings set with crystals. Her purple dress flowed around her feet in sheets of shimmering silk with delicate moon and star embroideries. It was kept innocent in its simplicity, even if it wasn't a dress made for winter. The fireplaces kept the chambers comfortable, though it left the hallways as cold passages between warm rooms. It had forced Bela to hide her beauty underneath a pale grey coat with fox fur linings while she ventured around the castle. A necessary inconvenience for courtly fashion, though the spacious inner pockets could fit her embroidery hoop as easily as it could her dagger. If what she heard was true, Aegon would not be awake to see her efforts fail. For the last stretch, Bela took 2 steps at a time in a little jump. Even with the draping trail of her gown, it was an effortless move for those like her with 2 working legs. On the top landing, she let go of the trail and hurried down the left corridor at a brisk pace. The rhythmic sound of her lonely footsteps made Bela think of all the people who had gone away. It had been a long, lonely week. Her grandparents were first, though Harry and Hagrid had been far behind them through the door. Her father with his princess wife, Jace, Luke, Joffrey and Rhaena. Her Valyrian cousins had left the same day Lord Boris Baratheon took his family and servants and sailed for Storm's End. And yesterday the few members of House Tully who had been at court, though cousins of the main branch, had taken their leave alongside House Hart. One after the other they'd gone away, though on the morning Bela's father left for Dragonstone, he'd pulled her aside for a last, private word. "Your husband is grievously wounded. Though the realm prays for his recovery, Aegon will likely die." Her father told her with the musing tone of a maester predicting spring was imminent, only holding back the full scope of his hopes on the off chance the signs were misleading, and it was only a warmer reprieve during winter. Still, even if it took longer than expected, spring would come for those able to endure. "As his lady wife, you will grieve for him most of all." "I don't..." "You will," her father stressed, squeezing her arm as a warning. "As any good, dutiful wife ought to do, you will pray for Aegon, sit with him and nurse him while he yet lives." Bela had felt ill at ease. "The Queen doesn't want me to be his wife. I don't mind if she annuls it either, but if she don't..." "You'll be fine, Bela," her father interrupted her. "From the instant my brother gave Alicent the crown, the lady has been complaining about one baseless grievance after the other. Don't waste your breath trying to gain her favor, it's moot. Lady Alicent has never given such to anyone except her father. Yet there's nothing she or the hand can do. There won't be an annulment whilst the king is in favor, and his decree was made clear moons ago." Her father acted as if his words offered comfort, but all Bela wanted was to go home. Even if she wouldn't have Jace or a crown, she could learn to live with that. After everything that had gone wrong, Bela just wanted to be as far away from the Queen, the Hand, and her broken husband as possible. To return home to Dragonstone and be with her family. To share a room with Rhaena, and divide their bedtime by giggling and talking quietly long into the night. To ride horses with Hariel on the rolling hills around the Dragonmount. Play games with Jace and Lucerys. Visit Hagrid and laugh as he treated the baby dragons like rowdy puppies, and watch Joffrey steal cake from Visenia's plate because she never ate it. To go sailing with Uncle Laenor. Though as he was dead, at least she could go with Sir Carl, who was as sure-footed on a ship as any Valarian. She wanted Princess Rhaenyra, who might not be her mother, but had always kept her best interests in mind. Bela even missed Septa Maga's nagging with longing wistfulness. That's what she wanted, yet her father was only talking about how to make do alone. "What of Rhaena? Can she not stay with me?" she pleaded again, having prepared a better argument than when she last brought the matter up. "Not long ago you planned to send Rhaena to Driftmark to serve as grandmother's ward and prepare her to be the Lady of Driftmark. That won't happen after they disinherited her. Why can't Rhaena come here instead? The Red Keep has a great court and she'd be with me. Rhaena said she wants this too." "No," Those plans had to be adjusted, and Rhaena will remain at Dragonstone with Rhaenyra and myself. Her father ran his hands through his curls. For remember, if you happen to receive a letter from your grandmother or Corlys, you will inform you of their schemes and not reply. I know, Bella said, swallowing down another disappointment. Somehow the idea of being stuck at Driftmark with her grandmother was suddenly as unwanted as being in the Red Keep. When had it turned out this way? When had everything gone so terribly wrong? I will do so, father. Her grandparents' betrayal had settled, but it wasn't because Bella was over it. Her initial fiery outrage had made way for a numbing coldness gradually spreading through her veins. The doting attention of Princess Rhaenys and approving words of Lord Corlys had been revealed as nothing but insidious falsehoods. Bella had been such a fool for trusting them. Had she ever known them though, truly? Bella and Rhaena were born and raised in Pentos, where their grandmother had visited to strike Meleys a handful of times, but never for long. When they moved to Westeros, they'd only lived at high tide for a few moons before relocating to Dragonstone. Bella had let her mother's fairy tale stories of the queen who never was and the sea snake get to her, and was blinded by the warm welcome, gifts and smiles. Yet even then, Bella had started seeing the cracks in the facade. Hadn't she witnessed how easily her grandmother in particular rejected family already then? She'd done the same with Uncle Laenor's oldest sons, and now she started on her granddaughters too, even though she'd once favored the girls. All three received lavish gifts from Driftmark, such as how Grandmother Rhaenys was the one to give her 3 granddaughters dragon eggs. Moondancer, Ebrion and Thunderstrike were all from Meleys's clutch of eggs. Rhaena had even received 2 when the first egg never hatched. But the grandsons? That was another matter. Grandmother used to say it was because Princess Rhaenys had Cyrex, and as a she-dragon who laid more eggs than any other dragon, the princess could sort out her house from her own egg collection. Yet that didn't explain why Rhaenys changed her mind with Visenya, and gifted the younger princess with the egg that had later hatched into Thunderstrike. And Bella knew better now. Initially, she'd been angry at Prince Viserys too, thinking if only his twin had lived instead of him, this would not be happening. A princess wouldn't cause this sort of problems. But Bella had time to think it over and calm down, and soon acknowledged that the babe was as innocent in this as Rhaena. From then on, she'd begun to pity him. Little Prince Viserys better enjoy his heirship while it lasted. In time, Lord Corlys and Princess Rhaenys would undoubtedly find faults with him as well. Perhaps their excuse for disinheriting him would be having a nose too sharp or eyes the wrong shade of indigo. You must act as expected, Bella. Share your concern with the king. Let the court see your distress. And please do try to refrain from wrestling any more princes, her father said, smirking at the last little jest. I didn't wrestle with him, she protested. With a skeptic smirk, her father brushed his thumb over her bruised cheek. The unexpected pressure made the bruise throb, and Bella leaned back. Her father brought out a leather sheath with a decorated hilt peeking out. Unsheathing the dagger, he presented her with a sharp steel. For me? Just in case, he excused, watching while Bella accepted the weapon and carefully touched the sharp edge with her thumb. Though mindful to only touch it with a feather-light pressure, it still nearly cut her. It was as sharp as a blade could get without being Valyrian steel. Aside from the elegant sway of the shiny steel itself, balanced and precise, the hilt was gracefully carved with shell patterns and set with a finely polished moonstone in the center. It's so sharp and pretty, Bella remarked. It is, just as the lady carrying it, her father declared. Keep it with you, but discreetly. After that, her father had gone away like the rest, leaving Bella alone with the vipers. Instead, she was left with Daeron and Aemond for good brothers, and her closest friend was Grace Wild, who was a sweet girl, but Bella hardly knew her. She had her sick and kindly uncle who was never around, an aunt who was around too much, and a crippled husband. Her days had been miserable and long without an end in sight, It was so unbearable, Bela had a few times found herself wishing Helena never left, though never for long when she recalled just exactly where the princess was. In my home, with my sister, with my family, my Jace, and my friends. Bela forced herself to stop grumbling about it. After all, maybe Helena was not the worst of that family. Perchance she could begrudgingly admit that. Helena had backed up Bela's tale that night. Of course, it had been the only just course to take when Bela hadn't done anything wrong. Had Helena said otherwise, she'd be lying to the king. Even so, Bela was relieved Helena made the truth of the situation clear. That wasn't a given considering who her mother was. What else did it have gone a lot worse for her? She'd used to think Sir Otto Hightower was the worst of that lot, but now she was inclined to name the Queen instead. She didn't listen to either Bela or her daughter, and had decided to blame based on her own delusion, and made Bela the target. Her great transgression, in the Queen's words, was leaving the feast without leave. From the way Alicent spoke of it, that was enough to judge Bela responsible for every single bruise on Aegon's body. Conveniently ignoring how half the guests had taken their leave of the throne room to stretch their legs too, and how Bela had only wanted to get away from Aegon, while the Queen herself was the one to send Aegon to the Belfry. How did that make Bela more guilty than her? Or mayhaps the crux of the matter was that all of it had gone too far. Regardless of how it happened, Bela had never meant for Aegon to get hurt. She never wished him such a fate. As much as Bela wished Aegon could have been someone else's problem, she hadn't meant for him to become no one's problem. In the last week, she visited Aegon daily after he was given his medication, watching his condition turn from bloody to grotesquely bruised to fevers and diseased limbs. The only reason Bela wasn't barred yet was probably because Aegon simply hadn't realized she visited while he was dosed on milk of the poppy. Though her husband didn't catch on, the Queen had seen fit to send her away in his stead. But Bela, in her stubbornness, had tried to hold her ground. I will leave by the order of my husband, not his mother. Then by the order of the Queen, I command you leave my son's chamber at once. Bela had no authority to deny that one, and so she did as bid, only to return the next day for the same to happen again. The servants, the King's Guard, the lords and ladies, they all saw Bela attempt to sit vigil at her wounded husband's side, and they saw her be rejected when the Queen sent her away, again and again and again. Bela knew she would carry the Queen's rejection regardless, but she could not afford to have the court observer be anything but a distraught wife. Her father had made that much clear. She would not make it easier on the Queen to shun her, which she feared was already happening. Ladies who'd been friendly with Bela throughout her courtship with Aegon had begun avoiding her, some knights and lords too, and they all had the Queen's favour in common. Though not everyone loved the Queen as much as they loved their king or his heir, and amongst them Bela found sympathy and words of comfort. The maid witnessed Bela praying every morning and evening in her chambers, and the rest of court might have seen her during a daily visit to the royal sept. Her prayers were sincere too. Bela was as sincere in her prayers for Aegon to stay alive as her prayers had been a fortnight ago when she'd begged the gods to prevent her moonblood from visiting her for a few more years. The gods hadn't listened to that one, but mayhaps the gods would prove more merciful now. Then again, mayhaps her father had it right, and the seven who are one was not the true gods. Bela didn't pretend to love Aegon, she didn't have that in her, but she didn't want him to die either. It'd go badly for her if he did. Bela reached the last stretch of corridor before Aegon's chamber and slowed her pace, going from a hurried rush to a confident stride. With her chin held high and a neutral expression, Bela expressed with her walk alone her supreme right to visit her husband, only for the guard to put his hand on his sword hilt and move to block her path. No one is allowed to enter, Lady Bela, Sir Criston said dismissively, his tone laced with poorly hidden disdain. She took a wary step back as the King's Guard denied her access. For someone so pretty despite his great age, Bela found him growing more annoying with each encounter. I'm his wife. How come Bela kept having to remind everyone of that when they were the ones to force her into the role to begin with? "I want to see Aegon." Yet she'd known it was fruitless even before she said anything. Sir Criston was the Queen's sworn sword, her white shadow and inseparable from his cherished duty. Luckily Alicent was already inside, but had given her lapdog a standing command to turn Bella away. The door to Aegon's room remained shut, but the one next door opened, and Prince Daeron walked out into the hallway, clearly having heard them talking. "You can't visit Aegon until it's over. None of us can." "Is it true?" Bella rounded on the prince, glad to be dealing with someone else but the prickliest member of the Seven Kingsguard. "I heard the most outrageous tale from my maid. One I do not wish to believe is true, good brother. Because if it was true, and my husband was about to be cut apart by the maesters, surely someone would think to inform his wife first, or—" "It's true." Daeron cut her off. "They're starting any moment. You would have been informed in due time. We've been a bit distracted. Perhaps you can empathize, as you know the difficulties our family is going through." "Aegon is my family now too. And when exactly were you planning to inform me? After they cut his leg off?" Bella hissed. "Did you assume Aegon's crippling wouldn't concern me, leaving me to hear it from gossip from my own maids? Was the stable boy more urgent to inform than me? When—" A moan drifted through Aegon's door, and Bella and Daeron abruptly stopped arguing. The seconds ticked by whilst they listened closely. She heard rustling, the creaking of wood, something scraping and what might be a man talking quietly. Another moan reached them in the hallway, but this one was louder. Seven hells. It was true, and it was happening this very moment. When she glanced back to Daeron, he'd become distinctly uncomfortable. You know now, and there's nothing to do but wait." Daeron cleared his voice. They said they'll work as fast as possible. Mother is in there, but Aemond and I are barred too, and we're waiting in here, so if you wish to, join us?" That wasn't an invitation Bella had expected, and likely Daeron wouldn't have offered if he hadn't been so distracted. Given time, maybe she could have thought out an acceptable excuse to decline, but with her head full of macabre fantasies of what the maesters were doing in there, she came up blank as a fresh scroll. Wordlessly, Bella followed Daeron into the rooms next to Aegon's chamber, with the door left open behind him to better know what was happening. It was a plain room, left bare with the exception of a mattress on the floor underneath a window. In summer, the view looked out on the sprawling city of King's Landing, but in winter, the glassless hole in the wall was barricaded shut with wooden boards to keep the cold out. The only proper furniture were 4 chairs and a table with refreshments that looked glaringly out of place, likely provided that day for their comforts while they waited. The room didn't have a fireplace either, and the only heat was spillage from the hearth next door in Aegon's chamber. It wasn't sufficient, and everyone kept their coats on. Seated in the corner, Aemond peered over the edge of his book when she entered. During the 3 days Aemond had flown to Old Town and returned with both books and a whole other maester named Munkin, Aegon's condition had steadily declined. The answers Aemond had gone searching for weren't as relevant once Aegon's leg began dying, and his fever burned his sheets moist with sweat. Maester Orwyle and Maester Munkin had tried some sort of treatment which did not see results, argued with each other for hours on end, and now... Bella had heard the whispers of amputation days ago, yet she hadn't thought it had actually happened. His leg had to be removed, or the disease festered in his leg would spread to the rest of Aegon's body, and he'd die. Yet Maester Orwyle had been uncertain which approach was better. Normally, amputations happened underneath the kneecap, but the damage to Aegon's leg had been climbing up his thigh, spreading closer and closer towards his hips. Aemond only glanced at Bella long enough for his lips to curl, and then he focused on his book again, dismissing her. As always, Prince Pointy Face felt he was more important than everyone else. Looking at him, one would never guess his brother was being cut apart in the next room. It wouldn't surprise Bella if the Sullen Prince didn't secretly enjoy all of this. The princess had brought a table, chairs and refreshments, likely fetched from Bella's chambers. The chamber with a connecting door to Aegon's, intended for his wife, but which were unusable to her. Since their wedding night, her husband had been moaning, weeping and sometimes screaming, so she'd moved rooms to have a hope of sleeping. The distance had only done so much. Bela kept reliving the incident whenever the memory flared up without warning, and always at inconvenient moments. Exactly what she saw varied, though it was usually a blend between seeing Aegon fall over the edge, to finding him broken at the foot of the belfry, or even Helena's distraught expression. Her nightly rest had been so poor that Bela fell asleep whilst bathing last evening, and even there the nightmares wouldn't let her be. One moment she was submerged in the hot water, muscles aching, her stomach knotted with tension and her head throbbing, and next she'd been brought back atop that belfry. The icy floor, Helena, Aegon, and the moonlit backdrop of King's Landing were the same. But this time, when the lightning streamed across the cloudless starry sky, Aegon had yet to let go of Bela's arm. "Let me go!" Bela screamed, punching and fighting to get loose, but her strength was inferior to his, and so Aegon pulled her along over the edge, cursing her as they fell together. "You deserve it, you unhinged cunt! I don't have time for your tantrums!" And suddenly they weren't falling from the belfry, instead they were falling from their dragons, and it wasn't the red keep below them, but Dragonstone. Her nose was filled with smoke, fire, charred skin and salt. Her ears echoed with Moondancer's screams and Sunfire's roar, and the bells rang a slow, deep lament, as if her king was dead. The world became streaks of blurred colors as the dark ground rushed closer, before they crashed hard into the warring sea to drown, Moondancer swallowed up alongside her. Bela had gasped as she woke, filling her lungs with lavender-scented bathwater. She jerked up for air, spluttering and hackling. The commotion spooked Tree Skipper, making her little Valyrian startle and yip at her. Her maids had reached her then, asking if she was alright while assisting Bela out of the bath. The dream had been so vivid, and she hadn't been able to calm before the maid confirmed Aegon yet lived, because Bela was honestly scared of what would become of her if Aegon didn't. The way the queen looked at her, she feared that if Aegon stopped breathing, no words of reason would matter anymore. Alicent would come at her with a fucking knife, while Sir Criston held her down for the queen's convenience. Safe to say, Bela had gone to bed tired and still unnerved by the dream. But the morning dawned, and somehow she felt even more worn after the night's rest. She could hear the flames crackling merrily in the hearth, kept ablaze through the night by her maid to combat the cold nights. Yet that morning it might have done its task a little too well. Hot and clammy, Bela kicked away her sheets and clambered for the curtain gap of her four-poster bed and pulled them aside. As she rose from the bed, Bela felt so gross, uncomfortable, and if she wouldn't have minded yet another bath. She felt as grey and moistly dreary on the inside as the weather was outside, before becoming very bewildered when feeling something wet trickling down her leg. She reached down, feeling the wetness on the inside of her thigh. What? Had she peed herself? Then she saw the blood on her fingers. Oh, Bela had flowered. It had been as unwelcome as it had been unpleasant. Disbelieving, Bela stared at her hand without any idea what to do. For the last couple turns of the moon, she'd prayed if this would not happen, not for years. Yet her twin sister had started bleeding a week ago, and now... Bela laughed. She'd laughed so hard her eyes watered, and by the time the maid came in, perhaps the tears were from crying more than laughing. What the fuck did it matter? You have to change my bedding and bring in cloth, she'd instructed the maid, turning her back to the witnesses while drying the tears off her cheek. I've started my moonblood. Once the shock passed, Bela found herself almost relaxed with the situation. So she had flowered. Bela was a woman now, the same as her sister was, as Hariel and Helena. Despite her prayers, a small part of Bela hadn't liked being the only one who didn't share this womanly burden. What made her pray for it not to happen had been Aegon, but it was different now than a fortnight ago. If Aegon hadn't fallen, she would have been made to lay with him, and might have been with child within the next turn of the moon. Her grandmother had tried to make light of it whilst filling her head with empty reassurances of how Aegon might only bet her once and make sure not to spill on her so their marriage was valid, but then wait a few years before taking her again. That way the king would have his Targaryen marriage of union, and Bela would have a few more years to grow before she had to face the childbed. That was her grandmother's hope. But since when had her grandmother's wishes counted for anything? They hadn't mattered at the Council of 101 when the Lords dismissed her superior claim to the Iron Throne in favor of Viserys, and it certainly didn't matter in Bela's marriage. A grandmother's words were nothing but wind compared to the husband's rights to his wife. And the only talk of waiting on Aegon's end had been asking how long it'd be until Bela would have her moonblood. A considerate husband might care for Bela's well-being and wait until she was older to make her carry a child. But as funny as Aegon could be, he was not considerate, and the only point of their marriage was a babe, preferably in hand before the sick king died. During their short betrothal courtship, Aegon had mentioned getting her with a son once she started her moonblood, and expressed an impatience it'd be sooner rather than later. Not out of any great excitement for their marriage, but because he hoped to get the responsibilities to the king over with. The sooner they had a son, the sooner they could both return to do what they pleased. Or at least Aegon could. Bela would still have to birth the babe and raise it. As far as her husband was concerned, this meant no one would have room for complaint, and his king father would be pleased. Bela would become a mother, whilst Aegon could go do whatever he always did. Aegon hadn't cared much one way or another about their betrothal, except mentioning they likely had more in common than he shared with Helena. Seeing as Helena didn't have a single thing in common with anyone, that certainly hadn't warmed Bela to his suit, and all she'd wanted was to postpone their farce of a marriage. How could Bela promise to love Aegon forever, when she could barely stand his company for an afternoon? Back when she still expected to marry Jace, Bela had been so impatient. She'd once asked her father to hurry and make the betrothal official, because she wanted to marry her love as soon as possible, yet everyone kept saying it had to wait until they were old enough. The earliest dates for their marriage were after Bela had turned 16. In her naivete, such answers had felt unfair back then, but not anywhere near as unfair as how the excuses changed on the whims of the king's preferences. Suddenly, her age wasn't such a concern anymore. Only Hariel dared speak up for Bela and ask them to wait, the way Bela wished her father would have done, as she had hoped Jace would do. Her own mother had once been betrothed to an unworthy man as well, before Lady Lena Velaryon the delayed tactic had worked long enough for the dashing Prince Daemon to swoop in and save her. Somehow, that hadn't happened for Bela though. Was it because Jace didn't love her the way her father had loved Mother? After the king's decision was made official and the initial anger faded, Jace hadn't even tried to change matters, not really. Yet even if everyone else thought a better unified family was a grand plan and proof of the king's great wisdom, Bela herself was more concerned about her life expectancy. She didn't want to die the way her mother had. Whether she was too young or not, her husband certainly couldn't take her maidenhead now. At the earliest it'd be a long way off. Maybe years, if ever. Even if he survived this ordeal, would his cock even work? It was the only silver lining throughout all of his madness. Her mother's slow, agonizing childbed death was something Bela would remember to the day she died, and she hadn't wanted to go out the same way at half her age. She had so much she wanted to do, and it appeared she would have those years after all. It remained questionable if Aegon would be so lucky though. A sudden uproar of Aegon's screams passed through the walls and wrenched Bela out of her thoughts. From that point onwards, it was impossible to think of anything else. Aegon was supposed to be dosed on milk of the poppy, yet that was unquestionably his agony they heard. Daeron had shut his eyes, his shoulders hunched as if he was trying to think louder than his brother's wails, whilst Aemond had gone rigid, his gaze fixed on the same spot on the page without moving. Stop! Blame, Mother, no! Bela's vision blurred over with sudden tears. His agony left his words broken and slurred, but it was Aegon's fear that cut through her like a knife. He sounded so scared. Please go back to sleep. Please, Fate. Please. Bela tried to distract herself with thoughts of Moondancer and dreams of flying, preferably to Pentos and beyond. But any thoughts of her fierce dragon only made her think of Sunfire too. Aegon's dragon had been agitated since the fall, and if he hadn't been chained down would likely have killed the handlers. Surely this wasn't helping. Moondancer was far enough away from Sunfire that her dragon was safe from his anger, right? Gods be good. But how would Aegon ever ride Sunfire again? They weren't only amputating his leg, it was almost like they were cutting off his bond with Sunfire too. It was unbearable to just sit there and listen, yet all three stayed put throughout the procedure. Aemond pretended to read, Daeron was writing, and Bela was trying to find a comfortable position to sit in when the cloth between her legs kept inching. Moonblood was proving every bit as inconvenient as Hariel claimed, yet it's not like she could flip up her skirts and adjust the cloth now, was it? Eventually, Aegon's pleading screams ceased, the shuffling and murmuring of the maesters lessened, but no one left before they heard slow-moving shuffling from the hallway. After a long stretch of silence between them, it startled Bela when Prince Pointyface suddenly rose to his feet. His book dropped with a thud to the floor, and in a few long strides, Aemond was already across the room before Daeron and Bela rose to follow. It wasn't the maester they'd heard in the hallway though, but Larys Strong. "Oh, Lord Larys," Aemond said shortly. "It's you." The Lord of Harrenhal and Royal Torturer stood in the hallway with his cane. The twisted clubfoot angled as if the leg itself was used more as a stick precariously angled for balance than as a leg. He peered between the princes, his face drawn with solemn sadness. "My young princess, Lady Bela," Larys Strong said. "It's only me, I'm afraid. We're expecting someone else." "We're waiting for news from the maesters," Daeron explained with a nod towards Aegon's door. "Of course. You must be anxious to know more. This ordeal with Aegon is such an injustice. The elder prince, defiled." The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end when his gaze lingered on her, and the sensation only passed when Larys smiled sadly to Aemond. Only then did Bela become aware her hand had slowly drifted towards the moonstone dagger hidden underneath her cloak. Bela clasped her hands together. How silly of her. Certainly Larys Strong was not a good man, as no man who volunteered to torture people for a living was by any definition good. But the Lord was alone, and but a cripple. Not a threat without the king's orders and his henchmen to do his bidding. So how come his mere presence made her feel so ill at ease? "I only thought to stop by to express my sorrow and concern during your hour of uncertainty," Larys told the two princes. Looking at the frail man, club-footed, misshapen from birth and hunched over his cane, greasy brown hair and black, blue-grey eyes, Bela was struck by the absurdity of how anyone could possibly think Jace, Luke and Joffrey were related to him. What idiots they must be to believe such lies. Besides the dark hair, they looked nothing alike. Bela had always known them to be true princes, but her confidence solidified after meeting the Baratheons too, which made clear what part of the family tree their much-discussed hair came from. When Jace and Luke had been talking with him, it was easy to mistake the princes for Baratheons themselves. Strapping, strong, and dark of hair, just like Boris Baratheon and each of his 4 daughters were. The Velaryons and Targaryens had intermarried since before the conquest of Westeros. King Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives were half Velaryon too. Like Bela herself, they had a Targaryen father and a Velaryon mother, and there had been more unions like that. Yet King Viserys and her own father Daemon did not look like Bela or most of her Velaryon cousins. It was unfortunate Jace hadn't been blessed with the silver hair of their 2 houses, instead taking after the dark-haired Baratheon side of their family. But otherwise he was every bit a dragon lord of Valyrian blood. Yet despite all the proof to the contrary, the queen kept spreading treacherous lies about how this shifty man in front of her was supposed to be their uncle. Well, Prince Aemond shared physical similarities with her father Daemon. Several said Aemond looked more like his uncle than either his mother or the king. But did that make Aemond Bela's secret brother? No! The only brother Bela knew was the one who died in the womb and killed her mother. So for now her only sibling remained Rhaena, even if that might change in the future. After all, her father was a newlywed. Unlike some men though, her father wouldn't risk Princess Rhaenyra's health while she was still recovering from birthing the twins and grieving her daughter and Laenor. Daeron nodded to the clubfoot. "We appreciate your consideration, Lord Larys. If there's anything I can do, I'm at your disposal, my princess." "What can the Lord Confessor offer?" Aemond wondered. "Your speciality is suffering. We appreciate your consideration, Lord Larys, but such services are of no use here." They broke off when the door creaked ajar by a servant coming out from Aegon's chamber, and then Lord Larys Strong was momentarily forgotten. Bela had expected a bloody mess, yet the servant's clothes were unstained. The only sign of the procedure were his ruffled attire, and his face glistened with sweat. Yet what distracted Bela was the bucket he carried. The red robes were bundled around blood-stained sheets. Cloth, bandages, linen pads. It had been stuffed into the bucket to be cleaned away. It swayed from side to side in his right hand, leaving his left free to carry the saw. Eamon stepped into the servant's path. "Is it done, my prince?" The man bowed at the waist. "Yes, the procedure is done." A shiver ran down Bela's spine. "It's gone? They took his leg? And he lives?" Eamon demanded. "They did, and he does, though I've been informed that Prince Aegon is not ready for visitors and won't be for a while. Maester Orwell and Maester Munken are still tending to him. Please, I beg your leave, my prince. I was sent for more water." "Then go." The water he'd been sent to get was likely meant for Aegon, and the last thing she needed was to give the queen another accusation to throw at her. "Prince Aegon is strong," Larys said, tilting his head. "I've known men to succumb to far lesser injuries than his." "Yes," Aemond murmured. "Aegon is of the blood of the dragon." Bela bit down on her tongue. Any other time she might have argued that, but no, not now. Besides, Larys wasn't wrong. Uncle Leonard had bled out from a stab wound, and she'd watched it happen. His wound had been smaller in size and scope, yet he died. Aegon's whole body seemed to have been reduced to a throbbing swollen wound, bones broken and skin torn, yet somehow he lived. Perhaps that meant he did hold some of the Targaryen fire after all. It was so easy to forget that Aegon was more than his mother's child. He was the firstborn son of the king too. Could we set Sunfire free? Every eye turned to her. Even Sir Criston cast her a befuddled look, for once too startled by her suggestion to remember he was supposed to glower at her. "Have you lost your senses?" Aemond snapped. "Sunfire has been unmanageable since Aegon's fall. He'd start eating the handlers and burn down the city." She jutted her chin out. "If that's what you took away from my suggestion, then my mind remains clearer than yours, cousin. I suggested it because Aegon's bond with Sunfire might grant him strength. We are always stronger when our dragons are near, but the dragon pit is too far away. For all you know, the reason Sunfire acts so volatile is because he's trying to aid his rider." Daeron looked sharply at his brother as if he'd not thought of it before, but Aemond was not moved. "How do you propose we do that? Without Aegon to calm Sunfire, none can approach to set him free without dying in the attempt." Bela faltered, momentarily losing her confidence. "Haggard can do it," she steeled herself. "I've seen him handle Caraxes when he's grumpy. Vhagar too. He doesn't need to get close for most of it. He could unchain Sunfire from afar." Aemond knew she was right, but as always he lived to be difficult. "And when Sunfire is free, what then? Hope he'll do what we want him to? With Aegon? He's not awake to call him." "If we work together to shepherd Sunfire, we can do it. At home we'd have to guide the cannibal back to his lair from time to time, and surely Sunfire will be easier than that cranky old baby eater. He's an unbonded dragon several times larger and meaner." "It's not the same. There is space for mishaps on Dragonstone. There are hardly any inhabitants and buildings for the cannibal to burn down on that lone island, whilst King's Landing has hundreds and thousands of potential victims if something goes wrong." "But Bela's got a point, Aemond," Daeron said, looking uncertainly up at his brother. "It's worth considering if it can aid Aegon." Aemond dragged a hand through his hair. "There's also the slight issue of how Rubius Haggard isn't here. I could fly..." Bella's voice lodged in her throat, because Maester Orwell had come through the door, and the discussion died abruptly. With the sole focus of everyone in the hallway upon him, Maester Orwell attempted to angle his body, as if to better hide the bloody leg he was trying to keep behind his back. The place the leg had been cut off from Aegon's body was wrapped and packed with blood-soaked cloth, but it was still a whole leg. From the pale foot and ankle, calves and up above the knee, in all its swollen, twisted and rotten visage, it remained unquestionably a leg. "My princess, Lady Bela," the Maester said apologetically. "We finished the procedure, and Prince Aegon is resting under Maester Munken's care." Bela couldn't tear her eye away from the severed leg, and neither could Sir Kristen. Eamon's eyes were almost popping out. He'd have to blink soon or his eyes would dry out, whilst Daron looked as if he was forced to talk he'd throw up instead. She crossed her arms in front of her stomach churning. The Maester nodded and took his leave. Laris watched Orwell hurry off the same way Bela arrived, but otherwise didn't seem affected. "If I may speak my piece," Laris said apologetically, slowly looking away from the limb to focus his hollow eyes on Aemond again. "I originally came here to see how you were faring, but I also meant to make you aware of an approaching visitor. The king is not accepting any petitions today, nor is the royal family entertaining visitors," Aemond said tightly, clearing his throat. "This is a private family matter. I assumed that would have been made clear." "Of course, Prince Aemond, but I believe you may want to make an exception for this visitor. Your discussion regarding Lord Rubius makes me wonder if she cannot serve a similar purpose, seeing as Harriel Potter has arrived in King's Landing." "What?" Aemond blurted and glanced sharply at Daron. "Harriel is here?" Bela asked. "On my way up here, I saw a dragon Norbert fly in over Blackwater Bay from the window." The news didn't have the same uplifting effect on the two princes as on Bela, which was odd. As much as she disliked Aemond, Bela had seen how he turned into a smitten dolt around Harriel, yet for some reason he didn't seem as pleased this time. Then again, Aemond reacted better than his little brother. Daron had gone greyish pale, looking as if he'd just been told Aegon was about to lose the other leg too.